everybody, and welcome to week 12. This is our second to last week of this course, and as I was saying to Crystal this morning, every semester I am blown away by how fast it all goes. So firstly, I just wanted to say that there is no activity for this week. I thought there was, and I very kindly gave us all the weekend off for the Easter long weekend. So there is no activity due this Friday. Your final activity is going to be due next week. So it was interesting for me to read through your activities on the supported employment and how that works and taking those principles in. And I think overall you guys are really getting a good sense of how this works now. And how that can be, I was going to say employed, how that can be used in employment situations with people with disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities. And I think that, it's really important to see the different ways that we can frame this. And one of the things that I noticed as I was marking your papers is a lot of people talked about sheltered workshops. So again, it's interesting to think about the first article for this week is about the transition from sheltered workshops for people with severe psychiatric disabilities, and the second one is for people with transition out of sheltered workshops for people with intellectual disabilities. And I think sometimes when we think about the types of employment and disability, we are thinking specifically of those things, and I think it's really important to note, again, that those practices are generally for people sort of in those types of categories, people with more severe disabilities, but also that this is a practice that has been highly criticized and is definitely not readily happening here anymore. So so anyways, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the idea of social enterprise. And again, if you guys think back to the very first activity, I think it was in this course, when I asked you to look at different types of employment supports, right? And at that point, you were asked to look at what is supported employment, what is social enterprise. So I think it'd be really interesting for you to think about, after you read these articles and where you're sitting in this course now, go back and look at your responses and how do those things change from when you responded at the beginning of the course. So just a quick sort of overview of the first Krupa article from 2003. So again, that's 20 years old already, so it's fairly old. But again, that's a time when sheltered workshops were more readily used. But just looking at the idea of choice in employment. So again, when people, sorry, there's two dogs here. They're not mine, even today. When we're looking at choices in employment, people in sheltered workshop environments, people often in even vocational rehabilitation programs, are not given choice around what they're doing. They're sort of told to do something or given a very, very limited choice in terms of what they do. So this whole idea of moving to a social enterprise, so an organization that funds itself, right, with some sort of social message, or it's a not-for-profit, and usually works with people who have been marginalized or oppressed in the past. And so the first article talks about Voices, Opportunities, and Choices Employment Club for people with severe psychiatric disabilities. Right? And they very much distinguish themselves from this idea of vocational rehabilitation where people are expected to fit in. Again, this is about accepting diversity, what people want to do, what they're good at, and how they want to do it. So taking really that control away from a vocational rehabilitation counselor, for example, and putting that in the hands of the people who will be doing the job. So they talk about the different kinds of things that they're doing in the 4 different businesses that they've made there, and they talk about a list of several several different rewards that they felt in that. So that those being legitimacy, so people felt they have a job, they have a real job. They feel ownership of their own type of work, the income that they're making, rather than doing just whatever somebody else wants them to do. A reduction in illness, they talk about in this study. So people were better when they were working, when they were feeling a part of this social enterprise. A sense of respect for what they're doing and self-respect for how they are doing it and their ability to complete their job. They talked about social opportunities, so people really having a chance to interact with other colleagues as we would expect for most people in the world, and also economic well-being, which again we've talked about many times during this class as a way, as a reason for why we engage in the labor force in the first place. They did talk about some points of tension, such as financial ceiling, having a disability label associated with a social enterprise, evolving control in there as some points of tension and some things to grow. But again, those are very much overshadowed by the rewards that were discussed. And then the second model talks about sheltered workshops and moving from a sheltered workshop for people with intellectual disabilities out of a segregated workforce. And they discuss specifically, and I'm sure anyone who's taken the law course has talked about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, so the UNCRPD, and that really focusing on people with disabilities' right to participate in employment. And they distinguish between sheltered employment, so sheltered workshops, and open employment, which is participation in mainstream employment. But then they also look to another option, which is a social enterprise. And again, I think it's important that we think back to sort of how do we think about labor force participation? What do we think counts as that, as we've talked about throughout this semester? And how does a social enterprise really encapsulate some of those things? So they talk a lot about the sort of things that come out of the social enterprise model for this group of people, and this happens to be in Australia, but I think there's a lot of links with North America as well. So around skill development, participation, relationship building, material well-being, again, sorry, I've got a weird hair sticking straight up there, personal well-being, self-determination, rights, respect, and equity. So again, I think it's really important when we think about all the things we've discussed and how people with disabilities participate in the workforce, and especially people with what might be considered more sort of quote unquote severe disabilities who have not necessarily been able to be seen as people who can participate in the labor force in the past. So give that some thought this weekend. Again, there is no activity this week, so don't worry about doing any of that. Just do those readings. They're light and easy and kind of fun readings this week. And then next week will be your last activity. I just want to remind you that we're almost done marking your papers as well, so we will have those back to you by the end of the week. Yeah, enjoy your long weekend. I hope it's not snowing in Calgary anymore. I ran away for a few days. But also now I totally lost my train of thought. Enjoy your weekend, and then next week will be the last week and the last activity, and we'll have the class wrapped up. Oh, I remember what I was going to say too was just when you get your paper back too, I want you to take a look at it in terms of remembering that all of the activities throughout the semester were low stakes activities, right? And easy to earn marks on, and the paper is harder in that fashion. So if you don't score as well as you had hoped that you would, make sure you look at that in balance with the rest of the coursework as well. Okay, take care everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.